Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah ta'ala wa barakatuhu. Welcome to Breaking Boundaries. I am Bilal Alihu. This is Safir TV and you're watching Sky 847. Today we'll be discussing Islamophobia. Does it really exist? If it does, what is it? With me, I'm joined by a legal expert, Brother Simon Marciniak. Assalamu alaikum, brother.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
And media expert and social commentator, Brother Musin Abbas, a long-time veteran of the Safir TV. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Gentlemen, waited a long time for this one. Looking forward to getting in some meaty discussion about Islamophobia. It's a word that doesn't escape headline, you know, literally every single day in terms of mainstream British press. It's in the media, on the lips of Muslims and on the lips of non-Muslims, those who support the cause of Islam. Without getting into any cliches, wanted to borrow from the school of critical thinking and philosophy too, where they say presume nothing and question everything. So can we just take it as a given? I'll start off with yourself, Simon. Is Islamophobia a reality?
Yes. My own personal take on the word is that, yes, it does have a meaning, but my view of it is that it's been abused in a way that is potentially damaging. So I think, you know, the trends of social media to blame for that. So, for example, as you've just said, every other day you'll have some incident on the tube, an incident on the bus where somebody's been kicked off, somebody's been abused, somebody's been spat at, and then you'll get some sort of message on social media with like hashtag Islamophobia. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So it's crept into the sort of language of sort of anti-Muslim and racial abuse in a way that we need to be very careful about. And I think the reasons for that is that, for example, if you go back into history, you know, growing up in the 80s, for example, you get unpleasant terms like Paki bashing and that sort of thing, which you know, designated a racial thing. Again, it was the wrong term because, you know, people called Singh, people called Patel got abused, as well as people of Pakistani origin.
To anybody of Southeast Asia,
so anybody
was target.
So it was the sort of targeting of the other.
Yeah.
You know, this little Englander view of Pakis being this sort of group. And then from there we get, we get this phobia being tagged onto us, like homophobia, so homophobic abuse, which again is a strange sort of word in a way, because phobia, aversion, doesn't sit well with the idea of aggression and abuse, does it?
So that phobia, you don't think of a moral, kind of like a moral culpability.
No,
phobia is almost like
claustrophobia.
Yeah.
So if you have claustrophobia, it doesn't involve you sort of smashing up lifts or smashing up cells or that sort of thing.
It's an irrational fear, right? Yeah.
But it got tagged onto us like homophobia, and then we come forward and we have the term Islamophobia. So for me, I just wondered, how did we get from the point where we had a racial context to the word to a sort of ideological context to this phenomenon? I think it's difficult to see a sort of relationship between the two because, for example, speaking for myself, if I was abused on the London Underground or on a bus somewhere, I wouldn't report that as an incident of Islamophobia. It would just be a sort of a bit of aggravation on the bus. It's not something I'd treat in ideological or religious terms. I think.
So when does the term apply? Does it apply to all Muslims then who encounter strife, who encounter difficulties in society? Is there a context to it? Or is it a blanket statement?
I think the place where it is useful is, for example, if you have literature, you know, for example, describing all Muslims as potentially jihadists. So, you know, if somebody were to write a piece, you describe that as Islamophobia because it's ill-informed about the origin, ill-informed about
Muslim belief, practices and culture,
and so on and so on. But when you have it attached to racial abuse. And for example, a good example of that is the Simone Joseph thing, where we can't say the word on air, but the ISIS, so-and-so, she accused this woman of North African origin of being belonging to ISIS.
ISIS affiliate of some sort.
ISIS affiliate, indeed. for them to then describe it as an Islamophobic incident is very, very, very dangerous, because when did ISIS become Islamic cause? You know, what's Islamic about ISIS?
Yeah.
You know, we strive as much as we can to show that there's a distinction between, you know, this terrorist group and our religion.
Yeah, yeah.
But then for people then to throw Islamophobia at that particular incident is for me potentially dangerous. So we have to be. So I think we have to step back and be very careful about how we use the term. Although that's not in any way to denigrate what is obviously a very serious phenomenon of racial abuse, racial thing for people who also happen to be Muslims.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Let me just bring up Brother Muslim for a second. The assumption that it exists. What say you?
I think before I come to the assumption, just a little qualification maybe on what you guys were introducing. The terminology is really problematic, because you've got Islam is a religion, it's a deen, it's a way of life, interpreted by many people in many ways.
Yeah,
it's not homogenous in its first place. Now, nobody knows that. So straight away, when you've used the word Islam, you're kind of assuming some sort of homogeneity, and you're projecting some sort of homogeneity which is non-existent, actually, amongst Muslims. So should it be focusing on the Muslim people and the way they practice their way of living in British society, or are we talking about Islam, the religion? Is there a hate campaign against Islam, or is it a hate campaign against Muslims, the people who follow that?
It's a very important point to make.
Second thing is, in this field of religious, if you like, the field of secularism and religion, there's very little mention of anything that might be alluding to Judeophobia or Christian phobia of any
theological
or Hindu phobia. There's nothing equivalent that's out there in that sense. We have anti-Semitism, which is about a race. The Jewish
cultural group, a racial group, or ethnic group, whatever you may say. Yeah.
And I think that in a way, partly, this is partly the problem that Muslims have as immigrants or people who come to Britain and don't understand the language, don't understand the nuances of what the language means to mainstream. So I think partly it's an own goal. Actually, adopting the whole Islamophobia label is a problem, because you haven't defined yourself clearly with this. I prefer the notion of Muslim hate crime, or the hate crime concept is where I'd prefer the emphasis. But Islamophobia doesn't say.
Why is that? Why is that?
Well, I think that there's hate against individuals who practice or live in this society. I don't think it's absolutely provable that everybody who's committing those crimes hates Islam necessarily. Most of them don't even know about it. They don't know what Islam is about.
True.
So they know what Muslims are because they see them in the streets, and it might be a Pakistani Muslim wearing a shalwar kameez, or a Somali Muslim wearing something from his origin. They've got different perceptions, but this has all been lumped now into this word Islam. And I think the problem that media has generally created, the media particularly, and also government agencies and others who are involved in this whole industry, this kind of counter-radicalization industry. There's a sort of whole economy that's built up around it, and it's adopted a narrative, terminology, and actually the narrative is all hijacking the Islamic terminology: jihad, Islam, Islamic State, Sharia, hijab. These are all common words now to even the average non-Muslim, but they've all been given a connotation which is smeared by, I think by all sorts of misinterpretations. And we haven't even got down to being able to tackle that. As a community, as Muslim communities, we've not really even recognized that that's happened, and that we've lost our narrative. Our stories, our narrative, our terminologies have all been hijacked. And they're now adopted by secular journalists, atheists. Redefining exactly what it is. So I think one of the first things we've got to recognize is that with the word Islamophobia, have we also now given that over to this industry? Because does it play into their hands? So it's a big question. I think being put into the same bracket as homophobia or or any of the other claustrophobias, it becomes an illness. Are we inferring that people who are Islamophobic are ill in some way? I mean, it's not clear. Do you see how the gradation for me doesn't work at all? And I first heard it, I think it came up in campaigns that Muslims themselves were using, but now it's actually gleefully adopted even by government circles. And every time government adopts something about Muslims, which they like, I get very worried. So if they're adopting Islamophobia as a thing that they're worried about, then I'm worried about them adopting it.
So when they do that, we need to put our thinking hats on as Muslims.
Yes, something's wrong.
At least we need to open our eyes. Brother Simon, just...
And I'm sorry, I didn't answer your question, but I'll come back later to it if you...
No, please do, please.
No. I mean, is there... the question, I think, was, is there Islamophobia?
Does it exist as a reality?
I think hate crime exists. The Met Police say that, you know, I think there were 365 incidents in the first 5 months of 2015 in London alone. And that's just the ones that get reported. And Muslims are notoriously bad at reporting things that are going wrong. They just sort of grin and bear most things. So I think the fact that it was 60% up on the previous 6 months was a shocking statistic in itself. And I think that post Charlie Hebdo and post, this was pre-Charlie Hebdo, pre-Paris attacks, pre the American attacks. So I dread to think what the figures are now, but in reality we all know somebody within the Muslim community who's been attacked, and invariably the majority of them are women, because they're the clear and open and definable target wearing the hijab. So it's actually attacks on women overwhelmingly, which makes it even worse, you know, what's going on. So yes, it exists, but I just think that it's the terminology probably for me is more close to the idea of a people who follow a certain religious way of life, if you like, which are being targeted with hate crime. That's what it is.
So, Brother Simon, just to bring you in, this idea of the hate crime, this idea of Islamophobia not being the most accurate term, what could you expand on some of what you think the consequences are, the implications are, if language? Because, you know, some people might say, well, it's just being semantical. People are being attacked nonetheless. So why is it problematic? Is there more reason to be cautious and to be more tighter in our language as Muslims and accurate, or hey, we're just being semantical?
Well, just putting a legal hat on at the moment, there is no crime of Islamophobia. There's a crime of racially aggravated harassment. So that's what anybody who faced with a charge of would be convicted of. Okay. So as the brother has alluded to, I think that sort of terminology is more accurate for describing what the problem is. But in terms of calling it Islamophobic, again, it is far too it's a poor match for what the problem is, in my view. Okay. You know, for example, if there have been occasions where Sikh temples have been attacked, mistakenly for
masjids,
for mistaken for masjids, but you call that Islamophobic attack? Well, some people might, but it's not, because it's directed at the wrong institution. And I think the most important thing to pull out of it is to show, yes, if you is the point I alluded to just earlier, that if you are using the term, be very careful you're not defending a cause, a jihadist cause, that's behind abuse in the first place. So the Simone Joseph example is a very good example of that, because by turning it into an ideological concept, you're undermining a lot of the important principles that we want to put out there as Muslims. I think that's a very strong.
The other problem is that it immediately casts you in the position of a victim.
Yes, which is very, very. This is something I want to come to a little bit later, but to touch on it for now.
I think the victim scenario is something which is very dangerous for those communities, the Muslim communities, because, again, when you're not really that aware of systems, structures, institutions, especially immigrant communities and Muslim immigrant communities that are still arriving, many of them are still grappling with those institutions and understanding how to express themselves within those institutions, how to get their rights within those institutions. And if you actually don't know what your terminology is, you actually don't know what you're really demanding or asking from those institutions, and the institutions adopt all this terminology, then in itself it's a problem. You've caused a major situation where you're saying I'm a victim. And actually what I was really going to say was that Muslim communities, because they don't know those institutions and the mechanisms, the way to complain, the way to sort of to get the best out of the system,
correct legal
to
redress,
lobby. What tends to happen is they do the easier thing, which is to react emotionally or demonstrate or protest or moan and groan in the background without actually getting to tackle the situation legally or through the sort of the channels that are required. And often what that means is there's a cycle of victimhood. So every time there's an incident that happens, you get more people moaning and groaning and shouting loudly, but without really getting anywhere, because they're not getting systemic change. They don't know how to create that systemic change. So I just think this idea of victimhood is a dangerous trap for Muslims to fall into, because if they keep just coming out and being angry, keep coming out and protesting, or like, for instance, the MCB or some organisations who take it upon themselves to react to Charlie Hebdo, react to the Paris attacks, and they want to constantly be in that reactionary, answering the agenda that's set by somebody else, especially from the state of being a victim. I think the public starts viewing you as a victim. We all know about a bully. When he knows there's a victim, and the victim behaves as a victim, he starts bullying more. And if we're talking about state level bullying, or we're talking about media bullying of Muslims through this agenda of Muslim hate crime, if you like, generation and portrayal and expansion, I think that Muslims have to take a new tact. Stop being victims. Start thinking about setting an agenda and start preempting. Start analysing.
So you sound like you're talking about being proactive and not just reacting to, like, chasing ambulances, almost to say, like, every time an incident happens you're just reacting, but you're saying you have an agenda, you have some vision, aim, and you work towards that regardless of the little
and that's what the Muslim community generally is extraordinarily bad at. They don't want to sit down and discuss and analyse. They don't want to invest in research, which is the first thing you have to do in order to have a strategy. They don't want to research what the problem is. They don't want to research what the organisations which are creating that problem are doing. They don't want to create the analysis and come up with the right facts and figures that you need in order to develop a counter strategy. There's very little of that.
Do you think there's a head in the sand? I mean, this is a bit of a leading question, or maybe it's a rhetorical question on my part, like a head in the sand type of mentality. Say, we have Quran and we have Hadith, so when you're talking about research and strategies and systems, you're kind of taking me away from Islam. Yeah,
if I can just develop the point slightly. Yes, I think that's a very, very good point. There's a tendency on the part of this phenomenon to exalt in one's victimhood, so to actually not enjoy it, but sort of, that's the way I am and that's the way I want to be.
It's a high moral ground, right?
Yeah, it's I'm on the high ground because I'm a victim, which is a very dangerous position to be in, because you look at the word anti-Semitism, for example.
It's an industry.
Yeah, exactly, and then it plays on victimhood. It plays on being the impressed person. So it generates this unhealthy cycle of guilt, if you like, on the part of the alleged abuser, which you can almost see in the term of Islamophobia, and Muslims who see themselves perpetually as victims. I mean,
so there's a race card, there's a homophobic card, there's an anti-Semitic card.
Yes.
And there's going to be an Islamophobic card.
Yes, which makes you untouchable. And I think that's a very unhealthy position to be in. And going back to what I was saying earlier about the movement over time from a racial perspective on it to an ideological perspective, because most of the complaints are directed at people of a particular ethnic origin. Again, if I was attacked on a tube, I wouldn't call it Islamophobic attack, but it is associated with, as you say, with women of South Asian origin. It then creates this thing. Well, you know, I possess Islam. You know, Islam is my religion. It's not your religion. It's my religion. So it's a sort of creates this sort of siege mentality. Which then generates this and sort of consolidates this idea of victimhood.
This issue of victimhood. I mean, if I were to take it to, I mean, again, our audience is quite often wanting references from the prophetic period. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was victimized. They were oppressed by Meccan,
expelled,
the Quraysh. They were expelled. There was an entire period of history where they were under constant attack and victimization. His response, I don't believe, was one of burying the head in the sand. I mean, at one stage, when they were expelled, there wasn't this segregation from society. There was still an attempt for engagement and the akhlaqiyat and the manners. And there's also a courage. There's a sort of a self-dignity.
Yeah, he built a society in Medina. So yeah,
and it was. I don't think at any stage that victimhood or that idea of being persecuted turns into some sort of feeling sorry for yourself and just becoming, a serial complainer or angry. The worst thing is that we get angry in that sense. Angry visibly, and modern day media. This is where it picks up as well, because. Again, not understanding the medium of modern social media or media, immediately when you react immediately, social media will pick that up. That's what they want, sensational reaction. And Muslims are great for turning up that sensational reaction. We were much worse with, for instance, the fatwa and
Salman Rushdie.
We ended up burning things on showing our anger, showing our emotion.
There's ever been an own goal. I mean,
But even to this day, the thing which ordinary Joe Public or
Middle England,
he doesn't, when he sees an angry person, clothed in clothes that he doesn't recognise, with people who are of colour and people who are not of his kind of thinking. He's not thinking, oh, poor guys, they're victims. You're reinforcing in their mind that you're a problem and that you are creating, you are in some way related to problems all the time. Media sets you up with those problems to say that you are the perpetrators of problems, terrorism, and then you're confirming it with your behaviour, with your anger and your physical demonstration.
So let me jump in. I've got to ask you both the same question. So do you think is it part of a deeper agenda of problem, reaction, solution, making the Muslims look bad, and we need to bring about a change, and so we have to change legislation that will take away human rights, but it's to protect everyone? Is there a deeper agenda? Or, we say we're looking at it from the media perspective, or is it just, do you know what, media need a good story? I mean, that's the nature of media. You need man, what's it again? Dog bites man is not a story, but man bites dog is a story. So, media is in the business of selling newspapers, quote unquote, or getting hits with an electronic age of some sort. So, what's going on?
Well, I'd say basically, you look, it's an ethical issue here. To say that the media is wanting sensationalism brings an issue which actually is now bringing me back to where Muslims should be, generating the agenda, setting the agenda. And we're missing a trick, you see, because whether or not state social political engineering is going on, or whether it's an agenda by neocon forces that some people say, some are saying it might be the agenda of, I don't know, right-wing fascists or whoever. I mean, those are things that you can speculate till the
there may be or may not be malevolent forces at play.
But what's a fact is that actually on the ground there's been an incessant, non-stop focus on all things negative related to physical manifestations of Muslim practice. So hijab, halal, sharia, so whether it's animal slaughter, whether it's to do with circumcision, or whether it's been to do with a code of dress, or the sharia law, or the sharia courts that deal with marriages here, or you're going to deal with schools and the Trojan horse. You have to be silly not to recognize that there's a pattern.
Okay.
So, common sense tells you that over 15 years since 9/11, and probably before then, there is a pattern where media who are run by very intelligent people.
So we're mainstream media now.
Yes. These people are Oxbridge educated, a lot of them, who are leading the media. The guys who are pumping the money in the background are not stupid either. We're not talking about people who are delinquents or
You're
uneducated.
talking about fringe.
No, we're talking about the elite thinkers of this society. How can elite thinkers who carry the code of conduct of equality, justice, liberty, they understand all these concepts. That's what democracy is supposed to be upholding. So where along the line have they lost the virtue ethics of maintaining balance of reporting, maintaining a balance of analysing the society? Where on the media have you seen people say, oh, we're discussing Islam and Muslims. You know what, could we actually analyse a bit more deeply what Islam is about and what Muslims are about and go a little bit beyond the surface? And wouldn't it be interesting if they actually balanced all the stuff around Islamophobia and terrorism and violence and actually talked about other social issues, poverty, well-being, health, ideology, philosophy, creativity, arts, culture. Why is that narrative all completely missing in 15 years of watching media and listening to government? Why on earth has that not been either utilised as a tool for creating community cohesion, engaging Muslims and the mainstream?
Yes.
And why has 95% of the funding all been centred around Islamophobia, terrorism, countering radicalisation? Why is it only this narrative is important? As British Muslims, we pay taxes. We are citizens, equal citizens in this society. We are over 3 million here. We built the economy
It's
of
a fair
Britain.
amount of tax.
And we continue to build the economy of this country, right? We trade with Muslim lands and Islamic nations and make huge money out of Saudi Arabia through arms deals, etc. So ethically or unethically, we're making money out of Muslims. And Muslims are contributing to this society. Yet when you look in terms of the output, either from the state in terms of the policies that are coming out, or media, which are the two institutions we're looking at specifically, in terms of exacerbating potentially the victimization of Muslims, we find this imbalance. And the pattern tells you, I don't need to give you statistics, but if you want them, well, Channel 4 tells you that in 2013, their survey said 7 out of 10 people, 7 out of 10 articles in the British media about Muslims either portrayed them as a threat or as a danger.
There's a university study that covers that. Yeah.
And then further university studies and I think YouGov and all sorts of people have been doing studies where they've also confirmed that 7 out of 10 British, mainstream British people now see Muslims as a threat, as a danger.
Just picking up on the sort of whipping boy point, this idea that Muslims are a soft touch, I think that has reached a very serious level now. If you look at the Donald Trump episode, you start to think to yourself, well, why did he make this remarkably stupid comment about Muslims and their entitlement to enter the United States? Because I think he did it deliberately, knowing what the reaction would be. My own personal take on it is, well, if you look at what led up to that, you have the huge problem of gun crime in the United States.
And that's across the board in that society, isn't it?
There's absolutely nothing anybody could do about it. The gun lobby is so strong, but the rates of gun-related crime,
homicides,
So this particular incident of a Muslim, wherever it was, I can't remember the city now, but this particular incident that Trump was relying was a bit of a gift for him, because then he could turn it against Muslims and say, okay, well, because of this incident, we're going to ban all Muslims from the UK, knowing what the reaction would be, saying, oh, you're blowing it out of proportion, this is just ridiculous, you're having a go at Muslims, Muslims are really peaceful people. So what that actually does is then minimise what the problem of gun crime
is he saying, watch the hand while something else is going on?
Yeah, exactly. So he's then minimising the issue of gun crime by the reaction of the people who object to his stupid comments, but there's a clever agenda behind it, because then it's downplaying the problem of gun crime generally in the United States as part of the electoral campaign. But us as Muslims are like the kicking, the whipping
stick,
the beating stick for this. And I think we ought to be very, to analyse these things very carefully and show these issues for what they are.
So was that a clear example of Islamophobia? Right, it wasn't in the UK, that was in the US, but would you say that's a clear example? Like, that is problematic as a word may be, but that's from a more of an ideological position as opposed to just somebody having an aimless rant.
So it is playing on a sort of Islamophobic if I can use that term, just for the sake of argument. Yeah, so it's using an Islamophobic
anti-Muslim sentiment,
something that's out there to pursue a political objective, which suits all the political parties in the United States. They want the gun crime thing to be smothered over and smeared and obscured as much as possible. But we as Muslims have to sort of counter that and say, no, we're not going to be used as kicking, as the beating stick for your political agenda.
But Sammy, there's also this clever trick that gets played within the political circuit. If you make a mainstream politician like Donald Trump make it sound like it's all right to bash Muslims, what you've immediately done is you've normalized that within a mainstream. See, that sort of narrative would have been a Ku Klux Klan narrative. Totally unacceptable. It's mainstream America. But the fact that a politician brings that into the melee, what you've done is you can see subtly that you're bringing the right wing.
The far right is coming closer to the center. Is that what you're saying?
And what you're doing is you're actually now making the ones who were, who say the Republicans, you're making them look even more like normal.
Reasonable, yeah.
So there's an effect it has. It's a drip effect of making people start changing the notion of what's acceptable.
Okay. Well, we're going to stick a pin just for a moment, only because it's time to pay the bills. We're going to go for a short break, but hope to be back on the other side. Hope to see you on the other side with Breaking Boundaries. Assalamu alaikum.